This part of the book is about how to define the sweet spot you want so you can take the right steps towards it and help yourself, your team, and your organization achieve more. Within it, we'll be starting to map out an increasingly empowering situation you can move towards. We'll be getting our heads around a key principle you'll need to take into account if your future sweet spot is going to be viable. We'll look at the kind of mandate you're going to need if you're going to stay in the sweet spot long term, and we'll finish up by focusing on the practical steps you need to take to get to where you really want to be. So, first of all, where do you really want to get to? This is the list of issues you should be familiar with from part 1, and while this list is far from exhaustive, it does give you a way of being able to see at a glance how far you may currently be from that sweet spot, and maybe also give you some clues as to where the challenges may lie. Could there be flaws in the design of some of your practices, the skills of some of your people, or the mandate with which you're currently having to work? Or maybe a combination of these. Remember, whichever it is, the challenges you recognize aren't going away until we address those shortfalls. Now, of course, that's not going to happen spontaneously just because we want it to, but most people are familiar with this famous Chinese proverb which tells us that we have to start somewhere. It's just common sense. But is common sense always enough? Given how long those issues have been around, maybe we could benefit from a little uncommon sense and recognize that this proverb may be incomplete. Maybe it could be easier to reach the sweet spot if we were to add to what the Chinese have said here and recognize that a journey of 1,000 miles begins productively with the first step, as long as that first step is in the right direction. Otherwise, you're simply turning it into a journey of 1,000, 1,000, 2,000, 3 miles and wasting loads of time and effort in the process. Maybe it's not enough simply to know what you want to move away from. Maybe you also need to get clear about where you want to get to, the alternative state of affairs you want to create. So let's take another look at those issues now and consider what the sweet spot could look like compared to where you might be at the moment. For example, if this is something you currently face, what if you had a mandate to ensure you're always being called in with enough time to add the kind of value of which you know you're capable? What if that mandate could also ensure that everybody puts aside enough time for you to be able to take a proper brief from them? And suppose the design of your briefing process and the skills with which you and your team can execute it could get every client to quickly and accurately identify what they require every time, and if needs be, talk themselves out of asking you to do unnecessary work for them. Suppose the design of your mandate also secured all the budget you need, not just to do the job, but to invest in your team's professional development too. What if you could trust yourself and everybody around you to write excellent copy every time? And the key word here is justifiable. It's not about crossing your fingers and trusting to luck. It's about being able to have that trust because you know the skills are there. And how about being in a situation where your mandate and skills mean other people only change what you've written when it makes the words better still, and that if you recommend copy changes, they're being accepted every time they're appropriate? And imagine as well that your practices, including those you use for measurement, mean you're justifiably confident in the amount of value you're adding. And what if the design of the approvals process and the skills with which people are executing it mean that the job is being done properly with no needless compromises and with minimum work for you and everyone else? And to underpin a lot of these desirable outcomes, you probably need your mandate to secure you all the influence you need to do the job the way you want to do it. And to make things even better, how about a mandate and practice designs which mean you get involved in projects only when there's a realistic chance of them coming off? So here is our alternative reality, or if you have other issues as well, at least part of how the sweet spot would be. And if you want, you could always pause at this point to take this in and just imagine how your life would be if you could make this happen, because you probably can. Of course, this list may not be complete. You may well want to add to it. Importantly though, we also need to accept that the changes needed to get you here are not going to happen overnight. However, you can make a choice right now to either take that first step or not, and still be facing these issues and possibly others at the end of this year, next year, and even the end of your career. It's your call. But if you want to bring these and other challenges to an end, we need to take an honest look right now at the barriers you may be facing. So when it comes to the question of what's currently getting in your way, it can be useful to think in terms of the resources you might need which you don't currently have. And this means thinking about something called the SMART-EAT principle. The SMART-EAT principle recognizes that if employees are going to perform any task to the best of their ability, they need some or all of the following resources. Firstly, they need to have the right skills. And if there's any budgetary outlay involved, they're obviously going to need that money. Then they need to have the authority to do what's being asked of them and to know they have it. It's amazing how often employees don't perform as they might because they think they're not allowed to. And they also need to be clear about their responsibilities. And then, of course, they need to have enough time to do the work and have access to the right information. And often they may need to rely on certain equipment too. Now, if employees have all these resources, we could reasonably say they've got the ability to do what's being asked of them, and on top of that, of course, they also need the desire as well. And we can consider the desire as coming from three sources. Firstly, it can come from employees understanding how a given activity will enable the organisation to work better. Sometimes that's not as important to people as getting an answer to the question of what's in it for me? What do I get out of this? And finally, some people may resist doing certain things if it means moving outside their comfort zone, which means taking into account how much confidence they really have in those ability resources. And just like all employees, if you or any fellow internal communication specialists are going to perform as you need to, you must have the necessary SMART-EAT resources too. And if you reflect back on that list of issues we just went through, it'll probably be clear that you don't currently have all the resources you need. So, when it comes to defining the mandate you want, our starting point is surely to define the SMART-EAT resources it will have to give you. And from the very fact that you're watching this book, I'm guessing that you already have the desire. And to define the particular ability resources you require, we probably need to think about what specifically you need to be able to do with those resources. So defining these resources as accurately as we can is vital if your mandate is going to be sustainable long term. To begin with then, it may be that the practices you already have are fine, but you can't always get everybody to follow them, in which case the mandate would need to help you ensure that everybody follows those practices. Or if some of the practices themselves aren't good enough yet, you'll need a mandate to introduce new ones and get everybody to follow those. A fit-for-purpose mandate would also need to secure you a bigger team if you need it, or more budget if that's what you require, and of course it would have to ensure that you get to influence all the areas you need to. Of course you may have other goals that the mandate would need to help you with, or you may even want all of the above. So how on earth would you go about getting this kind of mandate? Obviously you have to get your leadership team to want to give you that mandate in the first place. And this comes from really being able to demonstrate the business benefits of you having the SMART-EAT resources you need, and, whenever appropriate, how the leaders themselves would benefit from giving you those resources. Crucially though, no sensible leadership team should be giving you that mandate if they don't have justifiable confidence in your team's skills and practice designs. But if both of these are demonstrably fit for purpose, then it's reasonable to suggest that your team will have earned the technical right to the mandate you want. And that's a really important start, and in some organisations it may be enough. Other people, though, may need more. So to get clear about what you're going to need for your mandate to give you all the support you require long term, what are the SMART-EAT resources you're going to have in place? Eventually, of course, you'll need the authority and responsibility to get other people to follow fit-for-purpose practices. Before that, though, you may need some additional budget for a number of things. Firstly, if your current equipment or channels aren't up to the job, you'll need to be able to upgrade them. If the current practices or the skills of some members of the team need to be improved, you'll have to be able to invest in training and maybe research papers and so on. But even here, there's another consideration we need to be wary of. Many organizations talk about skills training in order to distinguish between, on the one hand, the teaching of techniques for doing things, and on the other, simple knowledge training about the products or services they offer. The trouble is, skills training doesn't really exist. It's kind of a myth, even though there are plenty of training companies whose literature and websites say you will learn these skills. You won't. Think about it. When you were learning to drive, by the time you got to the end of your first lesson, were you a skilled driver? Of course you weren't, because if people need to develop their skills, a single lesson is never going to be enough. You don't learn skills on a course. You can gain insights and learn techniques, but it's only through practice that we become skilled, and that takes time, which many people don't get because they're simply pitched straight back into the workplace with no more time to think and get used to new ways of working. And when they're under pressure, many people just revert to what they're familiar with, and much of their new learning can get lost. This is why having the right mandate can be so important. It means your mandate may also need to enable you to pay for extra pairs of hands, to give people the space to take time out to learn and tailor new practices and slow down for a little to get used to their new ways of working. And if your IC function is suffering from being chronically understaffed, it obviously needs to get you enough people on a permanent basis. So all of these things together should help give you and your leadership team the necessary confidence in your ability. Now, if we pause for a moment and look at this mandate, it may well be quite some distance from where you are at the moment, which would help explain why you'd recognise at least some of the challenges we looked at the beginning. Or it may be quite close to where you are. I can't possibly know. And I also can't know if the prospect of getting this mandate is something you find encouraging or exciting or daunting. So before we look at how you might go about achieving this kind of mandate, let's just remind ourselves what it's for. We're trying to bring to an end these and other challenges which are creating that lose-lose-lose-lose situation and turn them into this, a win-win-win-win, something that isn't going to happen just by magic. So to make the necessary mandate sustainable long-term, it may well need to be made up of three components. First, when it comes to having the ability to change your own and other people's working practices, we already know your organization's leaders will need to be able to trust that your team can actually deliver. So your team's skills and practice designs will need to be technically robust. And if these changes look like a lot of work and you haven't enough time or people, or if you think budget might be an issue for other reasons, you'll need a robust commercial case. We need to be able to prove that giving you this mandate is the financially smart thing to do. And even if you have fit-for-purpose practices and skills and enough budget, there may still be the question of how to ensure everybody else is willing to play ball. For this, you may need to remove questions of subjective opinion or seniority from the debate by demonstrably linking those practices to your organization's cultural values. This is why there are three more parts to this book that can walk you through these three components and should mean that whatever the objections, chances are you can probably handle them. Before looking at them though, let's just consider what your practical next steps might be. Well, if you want to remove these blocks to your teams and your organization's performance and get all this groovy stuff instead, there are up to 7 steps you may need to go through. Firstly, diagnosis. What are the challenges you currently face which are stopping you from being in that sweet spot each day? Some of them may be on that list we went through, and you may have others of your own. So we need to get them all out into the open before flipping our thinking on its head and considering what you'd like to be experiencing instead of each of those challenges. Then we can run a gap analysis, looking at the causes of your current challenges and what it'll take to get you to the sweet spot. Are there some skills shortfalls to address? Do some of your practices need to be worked on, or does your mandate need to be extended or strengthened? Maybe it's a combination of these. So we need to clarify this, because it's only then that we can put together the business case for the changes you want, including the likely investment you'd need and the business benefits those changes should deliver, and present that business case to the relevant leaders. If the sweet spot is going to require you to develop your team's skills or practice designs, then once you've got your leadership's backing, you'll need to do that work so you've got the capability to deliver. Then it's time to put it all into practice and, of course, monitor the impact those changes are having and make the appropriate adjustments as you go. And we've got a range of tools to support you through this process, the first of which can help you with these 3 initial steps. This assessment tool walks you through the 8 most common parts of an internal communication specialist's job, which we call mainstream practices. So things like your briefing process, approvals process, message calendar if you have one, and so on. We'll help you look at how efficient and effective they are, any frustrations or difficulties you may be experiencing with them, and how you'd ideally like things to be instead. And we can help you see clearly where the blocks lie, be it shortfalls in skills, practice design, mandate, or a combination of these. And this is something you can tap into straight away. As for the steps beyond this, that's where we need to keep talking, because when it comes to building your business case and assessing your team's ability to hit the sweet spot on a daily basis, there are numerous hidden traps just waiting to trip you up. And that's why we have those 3 further parts of this book, which can help you understand the main challenges you need to be wary of. In the first of these, we consider the design of those 8 mainstream practices. We look at some of the reasons why external communication approaches from marketing or PR can actually create problems, because, quite rightly, they were never designed for internal communication. And we look at how those 8 practices need to be knitted together to give you a demonstrably fit-for-purpose internal communication system, and you can compare this system with what you've got at the moment and maybe get some additional clues about anything you might want to change or add in order to reach the sweet spot. Then, once you've got your head around what your sweet spot needs to look like from a practice design perspective, we can move on to the question of how you get your leadership team to fund it. So this part of the book is all about how you can put together a commercial business case through a process of internal communication financial auditing, which I know some people think sounds a bit scary, but it's relatively straightforward. And it can help you credibly demonstrate the likely ROI your organization would get if you were in the sweet spot. This kind of auditing can help you secure any additional resources you might need, both short and long term, to invest in learning new practice designs, and every bit as importantly, ensuring you gain the time to slow down and get used to those new practices, and if you need it, get yourself a bigger team long term. And finally, we look at what it takes to ensure that no matter who you're working with, you've got the right to use your fit-for-purpose skills and practices long-term, because those practices are demonstrably meeting the demands of your organization's values. And we'll explore why doing this reliably requires an almost counterintuitive risk management approach to your organization's brand. So if you want, you can crack straight on with part 3, which you'd probably find useful to do before assessing the practices you've got in place at the moment. Of course, if you don't have time to watch at the moment, just make a note in your calendar now to come back when you've enough time. If you think this book might be something your colleagues, your boss, or members of your network might be interested in, by all means share it with them. And if you have any questions about what we've covered so far, by all means get in touch.